We are deceiving the world about God. Those were the words of an Israeli soldier after dying and returning to life. What did he see on the other side? What did he discover that challenged everything he had learned since childhood? Prepare yourself for an astonishing account that might change your view on life and eternity. My name is Amir Koren. If you had met me years ago, you would have seen a pious and disciplined man, deeply rooted in the faith of my ancestors. I grew up in Jerusalem, in an Orthodox Jewish family, where my life was shaped by prayers, rituals, and the strict laws of the Torah. My father, a respected rabbi, always taught me that truth resides in unconditional obedience to God's commandments. The Sabbath was sacred, the festivities were celebrated with fervor, and every decision had to align with God's will. For a long time, that was enough for me. I believed, without hesitation, that I was following the only true path. However, life has a special way of pulling us from certainties and throwing us into the unknown. When I joined the Israel Defense Forces, everything changed. The world I knew, made of synagogues and sacred scriptures, seemed to have no place in the chaos of the trenches. On the battlefield, I was confronted with a reality I never imagined. War is not just gunfire and explosions. It's the smell of blood mixed with dust, the empty gaze of a comrade falling beside you, the unbearable weight of decisions that mean life or death. The religious rituals that once filled me began to feel mechanical, empty. My heart was filled with questions I didn't dare ask. If God was truly protecting us, why were so many lives taken without warning? Why did the innocent suffer in the cold silence of the dawn? My crisis of faith intensified the day I saw my childhood friend, Noam, die in an ambush. He fell a few meters from me, hit by a bullet straight to the chest. I ran to hold him, pressing the wound with trembling hands, feeling the warmth of his blood running through my fingers. He tried to speak, but only a muffled sound escaped his lips before his eyes lost all their brightness. There was no prayer, no miracle, just death, cold and absolute. I should have prayed for him, should have whispered the Shema Israel, as we were taught as children. But that night, sitting on the ground with the metallic smell of blood clinging to my skin, I realized I no longer knew if God was listening to me. The stories of faith I learned as a child seemed distant and unreal. Noam observed the Shabbat, put on the tefillin every morning, followed all the commandments to the letter, and yet he died there, abandoned by the roadside, with no answer from heaven. It was in this state of confusion that I accepted the mission that would change my life forever. My platoon was sent to patrol a high-risk area on the border, a place where tension hung like a storm about to explode. I was no longer the same soldier as before. My movements were automatic, but my mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. It was during the inspection of a suspicious vehicle that everything happened. The sound of the explosion was deafening. For a moment, I felt nothing but the crushing impact that sent me flying. Then came the darkness, deep and absolute, and then something happened, something words cannot describe. I should have died, but instead, I found myself in a place unlike anything I had ever known. The first detail I noticed was the silence, not an ordinary silence, but an absolute void, as if all the sounds of the universe had been stripped away. My body was no longer responding. There was no pain, no fear, no cold, just a strange lightness, as if I were floating. When I opened my eyes, or whatever allowed me to see, I realized I was no longer on the battlefield. Around me stretched a vast space bathed in a golden light whose origin was invisible, but this light did not hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it seemed to pierce every part of my being. I looked down and realized there was no ground, but somehow I remained suspended. The horizon stretched to infinity, with no walls, no sky, no shadows. Everything around me pulsed with an indescribable presence, something more real than anything I had ever known. Strangely, part of me felt I already knew the place. It was like coming home after spending a lifetime forgetting where my true home was. That's when I felt something approaching. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but I knew before even forming an image. And then, before me, appeared a majestic and radiant presence, carrying within itself all the love and authority of the universe. It was not just light, it was pure consciousness, not only enveloping me, but flowing through me, as if every part of my being was known and exposed. It didn't need to speak for me to understand. It knew me perfectly, every thought, every mistake, every doubt. It wasn't fear that paralyzed me, but profound respect. Time no longer existed, only this eternal moment remained, before a presence that, at the same time, made me feel infinitely small and infinitely loved. I wanted to ask where it was and who it was, but before the words could form, something happened. My entire life began to unfold before me, but not like a distant film. I was reliving each moment simultaneously. Time seemed to fold, and somehow, I was present in all my memories at once. I saw my childhood, the days walking the streets of Jerusalem, the mornings studying Torah alongside my father. I relived the moments of devotion, but also the moments of doubt. But they weren't just images, they were emotions, thoughts, everything that was and everything that could have been. And then, something even more surprising. I saw myself through the eyes of the people around me, felt the pain I caused with thoughtless words, the fear I never noticed, the joy of shared moments. It was as if for the first time I saw the raw truth of my existence, without filters, without justifications. And that's when I understood something that hit me like a blow. My faith, my law-abiding life, everything I thought was the essence of my identity suddenly seemed incomplete. As if I had spent years building a great edifice on fragile foundations. But the presence before me did not condemn me. It did not accuse me. It simply let the truth reveal itself. I felt a crushing weight. It wasn't guilt. It was a revelation. And then, without a word being spoken, the answer came. It was a thought that wasn't mine, but somehow formed within me. You knew the law, but you didn't know the heart. You followed the commandments, but you never knew me. My heart raced. Everything I thought I knew about God, about the truth, was about to be completely shattered. My first reaction was to resist. I wanted to argue, to say that my faith was sincere, that I had followed the commandments with devotion. But before this presence, resistance was impossible. The truth was not a matter of logic or tradition, it simply was, and in that moment something even deeper happened. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I understood. My faith had always been based on fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of displeasing God, fear of punishment. I spent my whole life following rules, but never truly found it. And now before me, it was not a stern judge, it was absolute love. I felt an indescribable warmth envelop me, a peace beyond explanation. All my life I searched for God in the scriptures, in the rituals and synagogues, but I never imagined he could be so close. And then, before I could understand everything, a voice resonated within me. It wasn't a sound, it was a truth that was etched directly into my soul. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I froze in shock and awe. I knew those words. I knew exactly who had said them. Yeshua, the name we were always taught to avoid. The name we were taught was blasphemy, a lie. But there, before this indescribable presence, I knew. I knew with a certainty that transcended all human arguments that it was true. And Yeshua was not just a prophet distorted by other religions. He was who he always claimed to be, and I was standing before him. My mind refused to accept what my heart already knew. How could this be true? All my life I was taught that Yeshua was a strange character, a man who led many away from God, an invention of foreign religions. So how could I be standing before him? How could I feel so much truth in his presence? But the answer was already within me. Like a burning flame I couldn't extinguish. No matter how hard I tried, I sought refuge in logic, in beliefs passed down through generations, but none of it made sense there before him. In this place, there was only the bare and absolute truth. And I knew I was standing before the Messiah himself. My Messiah. My spiritual being, if I can call it that, was trembling. Not with fear, but with something much greater, a fear mixed with deep wonder. Everything I thought I knew about God crumbled in an instant. He was not just a distant and inaccessible concept. He was there, alive, vibrant, more real than anything I had ever experienced. I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask. I wanted to understand why everything had been taught to me so different. But before I could organize a coherent thought, Yeshua approached, and without saying a word, I understood. He wasn't there to convince me with arguments or to debate my beliefs. He simply was, and that was enough. Then something inside me broke. as if an invisible barrier had fallen. Suddenly, I began to feel something I had never felt before. It was as if I were bathed in a wave of light, and every part of my being was exposed to the purest truth. And then I saw my own reflection, not with my eyes, but with my soul. And what I saw shocked me. I had always considered myself a righteous man, someone who respected the laws and lived according to the precepts of the Most High. But before this presence that saw everything as it truly was, I realized how blind I had been. I saw my arrogance, the hardness of my heart, the times I judged others without love, the times I practiced faith mechanically, without letting it touch my essence. It seemed that my life had been built on a foundation of rules, but without a real relationship with God. And Yeshua didn't need to say anything. He just allowed me to see. And the experience was painful. A deep regret took hold of me, not just for the mistakes I made, but also for what I had never understood before. I had always believed that God was pleased with my obedience, my memorized prayers, my strict fasting, but then I realized that what he really wanted was my heart, and I had never fully given it. In that moment, without accusation or condemnation, I felt an irresistible urge to surrender completely, like someone who has spent their entire life thirsty, and suddenly finds water. Without thinking, I fell to my knees, or at least, that's what I felt in this spiritual state. I only wanted one thing, to be his. For the first time, I wanted to know God, not just know about him. Then Yeshua came even closer, and something extraordinary happened. He touched me. It wasn't a physical contact, for I no longer had a body as before. But I felt as if a current of pure love flowed through me, dissolving all fear, all doubt, all the invisible scars I had carried for so long. I was filled with something indescribable, more than peace, more than joy. It was as if I had finally found what I had always been searching for, even without knowing I was searching. A love so immense it seemed capable of restoring everything that was broken within me. And then, I understood. I had never been alone, not even in moments of doubt. Not even on the days I questioned God's existence. Not even in the seconds before the explosion that brought me there. He had always been with me. I just couldn't see. But Yeshua didn't let me stay. With a simple look, he made me understand something that filled me with sadness and hope. My time had not yet come. I needed to go back. My heart silently cried out, like a child refusing to let go of their father's hand. I didn't want to leave. How could I leave this peace? How could I escape this presence? But the answer came as a whisper within me. You must see the truth and share it. Before I could resist, before I could plead to stay, I felt a force pulling me back. The light around me began to distort, and an overwhelming sensation of being torn from this place took hold of me. My consciousness began to fragment. And then, in an instant, everything disappeared. The first thing I felt when I returned was pain. A suffocating pain. As if my body were being crushed by tons of stones. My chest burned. My head throbbed. And distant voices echoed around me. Distorted and unrecognizable. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids were stuck. A buzzing filled my mind, as if I were trapped between two worlds. Then suddenly, air rushed into my lungs like fire, and a piercing sound filled my ears. The rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was when I realized where I was. A hospital. My eyes opened slowly, momentarily blinded by the brightness of the white light. A deep pain coursed through my ribs, and I became aware of the wires and tubes connected to my body. I tried to move, but my muscles felt weak, as if I had been absent for a long time. He's back. I heard someone shout. My heart raced. I was back. So it was real. I had truly died. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a delusion caused by the explosion. I had been somewhere else, and now I was back. Nurses rushed to check my vitals. A doctor appeared, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You had a cardiac arrest on the operating table," he said. "You were unconscious for days." "We didn't think you would wake up, but I knew it wasn't just a coma. I had been there. I had seen. And now my heart was beating. Not just because I was saved, but also because I carried an immense weight. I had to tell the world what happened. In the first moments after waking up, my mind was in conflict. It was as if two realities coexisted within me. The hospital, with its machines and antiseptic smell, and the place where I was enveloped by an indescribable light and peace. But as the hours passed, the doubts dissipated. I knew. I had been in his presence, and it changed everything. I tried to talk to the doctors and nurses about it, but they just exchanged skeptical looks. "It was a traumatic experience," one of them said, trying to calm me down. "Soldiers who go through extreme situations report very vivid dreams." But I knew it wasn't a dream. Never in my entire life had I felt something so real. But the reality of my return quickly imposed itself in a cruel way. When my family arrived at the hospital, my father was the first to approach. His face expressed concern, but also something else. A look of expectation, perhaps hoping that this shock would make me even more devout. He squeezed my hand tightly and whispered, "Baruch Hashem, God brought you back." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of love and anguish. I wanted to tell him the truth, but how could I explain to an Orthodox rabbi that his own son, raised in the strictest traditions of Judaism, had seen Yeshua? How could I say that the Messiah was real, that it wasn't a lie, but the very truth? My heart was heavy, and part of me understood the reaction. But I knew I had to say it. For days, the words were stuck in my throat. I had something with me that could destroy everything I knew. But finally, on a silent night, I found myself before my parents. My father, as always, was sitting at the table, immersed in the sacred texts. My mother, more reserved, looked at me, trying to hide her concern. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath. "Father and Mother, what happened to me wasn't an accident, nor was it an illusion." My father raised his eyes, serious but attentive. "I went to another place. I saw the Messiah. I saw Yeshua." Silence fell over us like a sentence. My father, who always spoke with such certainty about the law of Moses and divine truth, stood up filled with a silent fury. "Don't say that name." His voice trembled with anger and pain. "You have betrayed everything we believed in. Yeshua is a mistake, a heresy. How can you believe that?" His voice echoed throughout the house, and the tension filled the air. My mother, always more delicate, began to cry. "My son, how could you?" Her pain seemed even more unbearable than my father's anger. They had lost the son they raised, the example of tradition. The truth I brought had destroyed them, and in that moment I felt more alone than ever. How could I make them understand? How could I explain something that was more real to me than anything else in life? From that night on, everything changed. My father could barely look at me, and when he did, his eyes were filled with pain and disappointment, as if I had become a stranger in my own home. My mother, despite her evident sadness, always tried to reach out, but her words always carried the hope that I would return to what I was. My siblings began to avoid me, and the friends from the community disappeared like shadows in the wind. I was raised to believe that nothing was more sacred than the bonds of blood and faith that united us. But now, because of the truth I knew, I was a pariah. In the army, it was no different. The comrades who once called me brother began to treat me with coldness and distrust. At first, I tried to share my experience, but I was met with incredulous and mocking looks. "You hit your head in the explosion." They laughed, as if it were all just a side effect of the trauma. Others were more hostile. "It's blasphemy," said one soldier, red with indignation. "You dishonor your family and your people." Gradually, I understood that my life would never be the same. I was alone, carrying the deepest truth I had ever known, with no one willing to hear it. Despite the rejection, something inside me grew stronger. I couldn't deny what I had experienced. I couldn't pretend nothing had happened, so I began to seek answers on my own. If Yeshua was truly the Messiah, he had to be in the scriptures. I spent sleepless nights rereading the prophets, trying to find something that confirmed what I had seen. It was then that I came across Isaiah 53. I already knew this passage, but now the words leapt before me like a silent scream. "He was despised and rejected by men, crushed for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities." My heart raced. It described someone who suffered for the people, someone who bore our pain. For the first time I saw clearly, this suffering servant could only be Yeshua. This discovery shook me deeply. Since my childhood, I was taught that Yeshua could not be the Messiah. But there, according to the words of the prophets, the truth was before my eyes. I began to question everything. It was then that I thought of Eli, my childhood friend. He always had a questioning mind, never accepting something without understanding why. If there was anyone who could listen to me without calling me crazy, it was him. On a silent night, I decided to seek him out. I needed to share what I had discovered. When he opened the door, his look told me he already knew something had changed in me. We grew up together, served side by side in the army. He knew every one of my hesitations. Standing there, he simply said, "Come in." We sat on the living room sofa, with sweaty hands and racing hearts. How could I explain to him that I had been dead, that I had seen Yeshua, that I had discovered everything we learned about him was false? I took a deep breath and let the words flow. I told him everything, from the explosion to the moment I woke up in the hospital. At first, he listened with seriousness and attention. But when I mentioned Isaiah 53, something changed. His face tensed. He leaned forward. "Do you have any idea what you're saying, Amir?" he whispered, almost as if he were afraid of being heard. I nodded. I knew exactly the weight of my words. I saw. "I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but you need to reread the scriptures without the filters we were taught to use." He remained silent, looking at his hands, absorbing everything. Finally, he whispered, "I always had my doubts, Amir. I always felt something was missing, but I never had the courage to question." Those words were a glimpse of something greater. For the first time, I wasn't called crazy or rejected. He listened. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. In the days that followed, we met several times, always in secret. He began to study the scriptures with me, rereading passages we had learned in a completely different way. The astonishment was evident on his face with each new discovery. Why were we never told? He asked one night, holding the Bible as if seeing something entirely new. I had no answer. I simply knew there was no going back. The truth had found us, and once we saw it, we couldn't unlearn it. But we knew it would put us in a dangerous position. Our faith was not just a spiritual choice. It was our identity, our culture, our family. Questioning it was risking everything. The consequences were not long in coming. Eli's family began to monitor him, suspicious of his change in behavior. In the army, my situation became untenable. An officer heard about my conversations about Yeshua and called me to his office. "Cohen, you're putting yourself in a dangerous position. You can move on with your life, but if you continue to spread these ideas, you'll face serious consequences." His tone was firm, but there was something more. A warning, perhaps even a hint of genuine concern. I can't deny what I saw. He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head and sighed. "Then you're forcing us to act." A few days later, I received the official order. I was transferred to an isolated post in the middle of the desert. They wanted to silence me. The base I was sent to was a forgotten place on the map, where dust was everywhere, and the silence weighed like a sentence. But what they didn't know is that in this isolation, I would discover something much greater. It was there that I met Avi, another soldier who carried within him an inexplicable restlessness. During the long night watches, we began to talk about life, faith, and questions no one wanted to discuss. When I finally told him about my experience, I expected the usual reaction: disbelief, mockery, disdain. But to my great surprise, he remained silent for a long time. I always felt there was something more. Something we weren't told. Those words were a spark. Avi began to study with me, and what started as curiosity quickly turned into a desperate search for answers. I saw in him the same conflict I felt, the fear of betraying his roots, of losing everything, but at the same time, the inability to ignore the truth. News of our conversations spread quickly. One day I was called to the commander's office. His look was cold and calculating. "Cohen, you're crossing a dangerous line. You can continue with your life, but if you continue to spread these ideas, you'll be expelled." I knew I had no choice. Denying Yeshua would be denying everything I had experienced. So, without hesitation, I replied, "I can't stop. The decision was made. The next day, my military service ended. Being discharged was a harsh blow. But somehow I felt peace for the first time. I was no longer torn between two realities. I knew who I was and what I believed in. But the price was high. Back in Jerusalem, I found out my name was already circulating in the community. My father refused to receive me at home. "You're no longer my son." Those were the only words before he closed the door. I stood there, looking at the house that was once my home, feeling a coldness that didn't come from the night, but from the rejection. My mother cried in the distance, but she didn't reach out to me. She was torn between her love for me and her loyalty to the faith she knew. As soon as I woke up, I felt unbearable pain. It felt like my body was being squeezed by an immense force. A ton of stone crushing my chest and making my head throb intensely. There seemed to be no air, and the voices I heard were distorted, so distant and vague. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids were heavy, as if something was holding them shut. The buzzing in my mind made me feel like I was somewhere between two worlds, until suddenly a rush of air filled my lungs with the force of fire, and the sound of incessant beeping filled my ears. The unmistakable sound of a heart monitor. That's when I realized where I was. In the hospital. My eyes opened slowly. The white light of the room blinded me for a moment. A deep pain coursed through my ribs, and I felt the wires and tubes connected to my body. I tried to move, but my muscles felt weak, as if I had been absent for a long time. And then, a word appeared in my heart. "He's back." The feeling was indescribable. I was back, physically, but my mind was still trapped in another reality. A reality I lived in a place where peace was palpable and light, beyond comparison. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, checking vital signs, and a doctor, with an incredulous expression, said, "You had a cardiac arrest. We didn't know if you would wake up for days, but I knew it wasn't just a coma. I had been somewhere else, and now I was back." Something in me had changed. I tried to tell them what I had experienced, but my words were met with disbelief. It was just a dream, a traumatic experience, they said. But I knew it wasn't a dream. It wasn't something the mind could invent. I had seen the truth. I tried to share this with my parents, but the reaction was devastating. My father, an Orthodox rabbi, looked at me with anger and pain. "Yeshua, don't say that name," he shouted. "Don't say that name." My mother cried. Her pain was evident. I was destroying everything they believed in, and the separation between us seemed irreparable. But within me, the truth I saw was stronger than any rejection. In the following days, loneliness became my constant companion. I was isolated, not just from my family, but also from the community. I was rejected by my friends, by my colleagues, and even by those I considered brothers. The pain of loss was immense, but something grew within me, something that couldn't be ignored. I had seen the truth, and I couldn't go back. My search for answers led me to the scriptures. One night, while reading Isaiah 53, something stirred in my heart. The words flowed from the pages as if they had been written for me. "He was despised and rejected, wounded for our transgressions." I knew at that moment I was seeing the description of Yeshua, the Messiah. It was impossible to deny. I began to question everything I had learned, but not with doubts, but with the certainty that the truth was there, in plain sight. It was when I met a childhood friend, Eli, someone I knew I could talk to. He always had a curious mind. When I told him the truth about what I had experienced, his reaction was one of surprise, but also curiosity. "I always felt there was something more," he said. And together we began to study, seeking a deeper understanding of the scriptures. Our small group of Messianic Jews began to grow, but so did the difficulties. The persecution in the army was relentless. I received a transfer order to an isolated post in an attempt to silence my faith. But in the desert, I met Avi, a soldier who, like me, felt something was wrong. He too began to study with me, and the search for answers intensified, but the persecution didn't stop. I was expelled from the army and rejected by my family. Back in Jerusalem, my father told me firmly, "You're no longer my son." The pain of loss was unbearable, but something in my heart told me I was on the right path. The truth I discovered couldn't be denied, no matter the cost. It was when I met my mother by chance on the street. She looked at me with a mix of pain and hope. "I see you have peace," she said. Maybe she didn't fully understand. But in that moment, something in me lit up. I knew that despite everything I had lost, the truth I had found was more precious than any religion or family could offer. The journey wasn't easy, and the threats continued, but each day my conviction grew stronger. I was no longer alone. A small group of people seeking something deeper began to gather. With them, I found the strength to continue. Now, looking back, I see that what once seemed like a tragedy, the explosion that nearly took my life, was actually a moment when I discovered real life. The pain of loss, of rejection, it was all heavy, but I gained something that nothing could replace. The truth and peace I found in Yeshua. Today I know the path will still be difficult, that I will always be considered a traitor by some and crazy by others, but that doesn't bother me, because I know the truth, and this truth is stronger than any pain or loss I have ever faced. It gave me life, and for that, I will never be lost again. What an impressive account. Amir Cohen experienced something that challenged all his beliefs, faced rejection from his own family, and yet did not deny the truth he discovered. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah, chapter 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Thank you so much, Amir, for sharing such a profound experience with us. And to you who watched until now, may God's blessings be upon your life. See you in the next video.